Welcome back to another Dietrichs video. Today we're going to look at work planes and its associated clipbox. For this reason I've turned on OpenGL because without OpenGL we can't work with clipboxes. For this video we're using a project of a hall. You can see that there are supplies stored right here. Then over here we have vehicles, and then on this side we have a hall with maybe a gate over here. But that actually doesn't interest us in this video today. I'm going to zoom in to this column where we want to work on, let's say, this bracket over here, or work on modifying other components of or around this column. So let's say we want to do something around this column here, but we do see that there's a whole bunch of other materials and components around this column that are in the way of us doing more detailed work around here. So a clipbox and a work plane around this area is going to be very convenient and practical. So in order to use a clipbox, since version 25, we actually have this palette down at the right here. If you don't see that palette, you can go on to 9, Views and Sections, then on to number 2, Work Planes, and number 4, Display Settings, Work Planes and Clipbox. If I was to click on that, that would now turn that palette off at the bottom right. If you don't have it, then just simply go on to 924 and turn that on. On another note, if you don't see it, it may actually be hidden on the right side here. You can just simply click on that and that opens it to the bottom right here. Also, if you want to see your presets, just simply click on that little button over here and you'll get to see your row of 9 presets here. So in the first line here, we see a radio button to turn on the clipbox, the next one to turn on the grid, and then here we see the amount of transparency. All the other settings we're going to be talking about in a second. So let's first turn on a work plane. We could do that by going into Views, Work Planes, and then here you can see the horizontal, vertical, arbitrary work plane. But let's look at an alternative to that, and that is this button right here. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to actually go onto my preset number 1 here, which is Grid On, Clipbox On. You can see that we have both of these check marks now on here. And then I'm going to select an object, and I'm going to zoom in on this column here, double click to select it, right click to get out of that. And now you can see that we have the work plane and a clipbox turned on. Sorry for that rough cut. While I was off camera here, I had clicked over on Free Design. Wanted to now show you that there are 2 new work planes that have been created automatically here in Free Design. And that is Object from the front and Object from the left. So I can see that now in 2 orientations. I can also go down here now and choose the orientation. You can see from the front or from the left. And it just toggles back and forth between those 2. And now you can also see that we can actually turn off the clipbox. So you'll see everything again here. Or we can turn on and off the grid as well. And of course, if we wanted to, we could also change our transparency. Let's have a look at our cut edges, and for that I'm going to zoom in a bit further. I'm going to quickly rotate it a bit, and you can actually look right into the component, but you'll notice that there are no edges around this component. If I go over here now to cut edges, and if I turn that on, you can now notice that we have now lines at all these edges, including these rafters up here. But we're going to have a look at that a little bit in more detail later. For now, I'm going to zoom out a bit. So let's look at the work planes in a bit more detail. And the first thing to notice is that the work planes that have been created here are temporary, which is why we can see over here in brackets object. If I go back to this palette here and I deselect the objects, you can now see that the clipbox is gone and the temporary work planes that were previously here are now gone as well. You can also see that I cannot scroll through the different orientations anymore. Let's look at another example. I'm going to select another beam here. And you can now see that it has created 2 other work planes we have a vertical one and a horizontal one, and we can click through them down here as well. With the column that we just had in the previous example, we had two different work planes, essentially two vertical ones, but in two different directions. Now we have vertical and horizontal. I'm going to now deselect that as well again. I'm going to choose another component here, right mouse click. You can now see that a clipbox was created around this rafter. And so what you can notice now is that we actually have three work planes. You can see the first one here that is vertical, the next one that is slanted along the length of this rafter, and then the last one is chamfered, and that's because the top of this rafter actually is chamfered, and this work plane is now in the orientation of that chamfer. That as well, we're going to deselect again. So let's choose this column down here again. Select, I'm going to click, another click to confirm, and right click to activate the clipbox. So what is the purpose of these cut edges now? And for that reason, I'm going to zoom back in here. So let's say I went to measure something, and I'm going to go to measure point to point in the global system here. If I go to this line right now, you can see that the point is actually picked over here, even though I seem to be closer here, but that's because it still measures in the entire global system as if the clipbox wasn't there. So the point to notice here is that the edges still have its original length. You can see that it actually disappears out of the screen right here, and that can be very useful. I can also demonstrate that over here. If I go on to this line, you will see that it actually continues outside of the clipbox. This demonstrates that all the components are still here. The clipbox has just temporarily cut that off. With this setting on over here, if you go close to this point, even though this line doesn't actually exist in the global model, you can see that I can actually catch this point, even though that is really not a point that should be existing otherwise if the clipbox wasn't there. And this can be very helpful in certain instances. In the past, before we introduced the cut edges function, you actually couldn't catch this point at all. Let's deselect our column again, and I'm going to fully zoom out. Let's select a few other components. I'm going to go on select again, zoom in a little bit, and let's say I'm going to just select this beam over here. I double click to select it. I'm not going out of the function yet by right clicking, and so I can choose more components. I'm going to choose that beam, and I'm going to also select the beam up here. Click, and by right clicking now, I'm going to choose the clipbox, and you can see that the clipbox has been formed around these three components now, these three beams, and the work plane has been formed around the first one that I selected, and you can see all the associated work planes up here with this first component that I chose. So the work plane was defined by the first component that I selected, but the other component enlarged the clipbox overall. About the size of the clipbox, we will get to that in a moment. For now, I'm going to deselect that again and zoom out. I'm going to go and select the column again. So I zoomed back into this clipbox here, and there is one value that we haven't talked about yet at all yet, and that is the clipbox offset at the bottom here. For some reason, it is displaying my setting in feet and inches. Okay, so the last line down here that we haven't talked about yet is the clipbox offset, and you can see that it's now set to 1 meter. So that means we have a clipbox of 1 meter. If I change that to 2, you'll see right away that we get a much bigger clipbox. So at any time, we can really define the size of the clipbox and the size of our work plane or our temporary work planes as well. And we can of course still change our temporary work plane attributes and settings by right clicking on that here. We can go into grid settings or change the size, where we just simply grab these little arrows and then we can drag and increase the size. Okay, I'm going to set it back to 1 meter. There we go. So that shows you a very quick way of how we can choose and select our different temporary work planes and Clipbox settings via all these different settings down here. So we're still on our column here, and I'm going to show you one more thing. I'm going to zoom in a bit further again, and I'm going to change the location of our work plane here. I'm going to go to offset parallel, and I'm going to set it on the same level as this beam right here. And that's where it's very handy that I can click this point. And that allowed me to change the location of the work plane to be in line with this beam here. And to quickly mention again, it is still a temporary work plane for now. So I'm going to turn off one of the components here on our bracket. On the rear bracket, I'm really not concerned about that just because we don't see it right now. So I'm now going to go ahead and reproduce these lines from this component and projecting it onto the grid here. In version 26, I can now use this draw function down here. Lines, line. And you can now see as soon as I move close to that component that these lines are being projected onto the work plane. So I go close to here, that gets me the first point, down here, yep, up here, and then back to the origin. Okay, right click. That has now created the lines on the work plane projected forward. Now I'm going to create an offset from these lines. I'm going to go back into my draw function and then down to the offset function. I'm going to put in 0.08, which is 8 centimeters. And now I simply go onto that line. I always need to make sure that I'm going into the right direction with that line. Now I'm going to trim these corners here, and I'm going to use the adjust function. Oh. Okay, now I have this triangle, which is going to represent these components over here. Now I still need to create the one right here in the middle. I'm going to draw a line again. I go from the center of this over here, and then I'm going to do an offset this time now of 4 centimeters. I'm going to draw offset 4 centimeters. Okay, I adjusted them to that line, so I know that I exactly have a point right here. Now I'm going to use a new function here to create the notch. So I'm going to go into processes, cuts, and a notch. I have to first select the component, right click. Now I have that selected. You can see that it always projects it to the back when you have the right location. There we go. Right click, and now that created that notch. I'm going to select that component again, right click, and now I'm in it. Now I can choose this point. that point. And to go down here, right click, and that closes the line. And there we go. That created the notches inside of this component. Okay, so that was a way for us to create these notches into this bracket. And you may have already noticed, but this temporary work plane, or what was previously a temporary work plane, has now become a permanent one. So there's two ways to create a permanent work plane out of a temporary one. And number one, that is by starting to draw on it. That will then make it permanent. And there is an alternative solution to that as well. I'm just going to go back to this here. So I'll show you on this other one right here that we can make that into a permanent work plane as well. I'm going to simply right click on it, change attributes, and by simply giving it a number, and let's say column from left, you can now see that that has become a permanent work plane as well. So just like that, I can create temporary and permanent work planes very quickly, and that should really increase the speed of how you're working by using the clip boxes and the work planes. Now we're wishing you much success with the work planes and the clip box. See you in the next one.